I am joined today, or we are joined today, by our guest speaker and presenter, Cynthia Peters. I will be hosting, going over the housekeeping slides, and then I'm going to turn it over to the Director of Professional Development at Train PD, Beth Ponder. I would like to just introduce Cynthia at this time, and let me see a show of hands really quickly. How many of you have been to other webinars with Cynthia? This is webinar number 4, and Train PD would like to welcome back Cynthia Peters to Texas and for providing this informative webinar series. Cynthia Peters works for World Education and is the editor for the national publication, The Change Agent. She currently teaches ESOL in a workplace-based program in Boston, and since 2002 has taught a wide range of adult education classes, including ABE, GED, Bridge to College, and Adult Diploma Program. Train PD was lucky enough to have Cynthia Peters present a Tech and Tell webinar for us too. So at this time, I'd like to welcome Cynthia. And I'm going to transfer this over, so hold on, Cynthia. I'm going to hand you presenter rights, and you are ready to go. And I think you are unmuted, I believe. Yes, you are. There you go.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Anne-Marie, for that great welcome and for all that information. And thanks to everybody at Train TCAL for having me and for setting up the infrastructure for me to be able to share this information, and for all that you're doing. And especially thank you to all you teachers who are here on this webinar. I know it's really hard times out there. It feels like the floor kind of fell out from underneath us all, and everybody's scrambling to try to keep things going. And so I really appreciate you being on this webinar, and I appreciate everything you're doing out there. So thank you. I look forward to hearing from you. We have several interactive moments during this webinar, so I hope you will use the chat box. It always makes the webinar a lot more interesting when I hear from you and when you all hear from each other. Let's just look at the agenda. As Anne-Marie said, this is the 4th of 6 webinars, so there's going to be some more coming up in May and June. We've been focusing on the census a lot. This one focuses on real-world math, and my goal for this hour is to leave you with some ideas about why even use the census to teach math. Like, what's the point of that? Also some links to some ready-to-use resources, so you could leave this webinar with some actual classroom materials. And we're going to have an interactive moment where I'm going to leave the PowerPoint and go onto my screen and share with you an interesting map, and we're going to come up with some ideas about how to use this map to teach some real-life math problems and problem solving. And for the final section of the webinar, I'm going to tell you about the Census Ambassador opportunity, which I have talked about in previous webinars, but so this is going to be a brief version, but there's new information, which is the National Coalition for Literacy is collaborating with us, and there's this option to, as a teacher, if you train people to be census ambassadors, receive a $50 gift card, and even more than that, and you'll hear more about that later. And the census ambassadors that you train could get a $20 gift card, and then $1 more per person who they bring into this NCL's pledge to be counted. So I'm going to give you more information about that at the end of the webinar. It's not 100% math related, but in a way it is. And I hope it sort of creates a little extra incentive for you to think about taking on teaching the census, and also for you to give your students this opportunity to become census ambassadors, which is just a great leadership development opportunity for them, a great way for them to practice their speaking and listening skills, and their math skills, and digital literacy skills, and all sorts of things. So that is our agenda for today. If you want to go back and hear the recordings of any of those previous webinars, please do, and keep in mind they were all done before the crisis occurred, and so they have a slightly different tone to them. Now we're obviously doing everything virtually, and there's no face-to-face contact anymore. So everything looks a little bit different, including the census, and I'm going to be saying a little bit about that too. One thing that's different with the census is that the timeline has been extended. So before the hard stop on counting everybody was July 31st, it's been extended by 2 weeks. I imagine that this is in flux. I imagine that this could easily change depending on how things go. There's so many unknowns right now. The Census Bureau has been through a tremendous upheaval. Obviously, all the people that they thought they were hiring, they may not be hiring. They may not be able to interview them. They may not be able to fingerprint them. They may not be able to send them to people's homes. There's whole different protocols now on what it means to actually go knock on someone's door. So everything is different, including even their operators who are on hand to answer calls. So one thing to keep in mind is in my previous webinars, I've talked about the various ways that you can fill out the census, and those include online, on paper, by phone, and then in person. So the phone and the in person are really different right now because they don't have a lot of operators standing by, and they certainly don't have a lot of people who are going to be going door to door. So that looks different, and that's going to be unfolding as time goes by. Clearly, the best way to fill out the census is online. If that is at all possible for your students, that is what I'm recommending. And I'm going to say a little bit more about that later. But so the big change right now is just that things have been extended a little bit, and the in-person possibility of filling out the census is less possible. The main thing I wanted to communicate about the changes in the census. And I'm going to check and see, if you have any questions about anything I'm saying as we go, please feel free to ask. So the title of this webinar is Teaching Math in the Context of the Census, or something like that. That might not be the exact title, but that is the basic idea. And I thought it was worth thinking a little bit about why. Why would we teach math in the context of the census? If you have anything to add to my bullet points, I'd love to hear them. But this is what I came up with. It's obviously extremely relevant and timely, okay? There's billboards about it, there's PSAs on the radio, there's stuff coming in your mail about the census. It's being talked about all over the place. Of course, it's been subsumed now and overshadowed by the pandemic. So that's real, but it's also a kind of a real life thing that we could be talking about with our students that's not the pandemic. And I think that matters. It also matters because, how we get counted, even though we have to get counted during a pandemic, is going to have huge repercussions for how resources are disseminated across the country. And you can be sure that information and data from the 2010 census is determining a lot about how health-related resources are getting disseminated now in the context of the pandemic. So the data that is collected is just hugely important to our communities. And so teaching math in the context of this highly relevant topic and this highly relevant current event is just a way to get people's attention and grab their attention and ground it and ground the math in something relevant. It really matters to our communities. I'm going to say specifically why in a little bit later. The content is excellent for teaching math concepts like rigor and critical thinking. And I hope my examples that I have to share with you today are going to be good examples of that. And also just kind of on a generic level, math is training for the brain. I have a great article in the math issue of the Change Agent. In case you didn't see this, we do have a PDF of the math issue of the Change Agent on our website. And this is written by Sarah Lonberg-Liu, who does a lot of math professional development. You might have seen her at COABE or any of the other major national conferences. And she just makes the point that, a lot of times students are like, but why do I have to learn this? Why do I need to be able to, reduce fractions or, solve improper fractions or, just do these algebraic equations? What's the point? When am I ever going to use this in my life? And she makes the point that, even if you're not doing that exact thing in your life, the process of solving math problems is really good training for your brain. For one thing, it forces you to ask questions like, what do I know and what do I not know? And what can I figure out? And what tools do I need to figure it out? And that is good practice for workplace, for academic challenges across the board, for life challenges, for community challenges. For example, dealing with this pandemic. It's when you've trained your brain to sit down and face a problem and take it apart and think about what tools you need, you're actually equipping yourself in so many ways for lots of challenges in this life. So I wanted to share that article. I actually encourage you to share that very article with students. It helps people come into math class with a different attitude, honestly. Here's why you should do this. You know, it might seem irrelevant, but it's not. So I decided to throw this slide up here because it's from the College and Career Readiness Standards. It's the Standards for Mathematical Practice. And a lot of these are going to come up when we're talking about the math problems that we're going to look at. I don't know if you're familiar with these, or if you know, I don't actually know too much about who's on this. I'm assuming a lot of you are math teachers. But if you want to just tell me in the chat, you know, do you teach by the College and Career Readiness Standards or not? And if you don't, I bet you these concepts are familiar to you in any case, because there's nothing new under the sun. College and Career Readiness Standards aren't brand new by any stretch of the imagination. It's what any good math teacher is always thinking about when they're teaching math, how to make sense of problems and persevere in solving them, how to reason abstractly, how to construct viable arguments, all these things here. Attending to precision, really important. Looking for and expressing regularity and repeated reasoning. Yeah, so Texas has its own standards, but I'm guessing that there's a lot of overlap. There's another overlap which I wanted to point out, which is the overlap between math practices and ELA practices. So in ELA, you know, we want people to be able to grapple with increasingly complex texts. And in math, you know, we want people to face a hard problem and not give up. And it's sort of the same idea. Also in ELA, we want people to be able to point to evidence in text and use that evidence to make your own argument when you're either writing or speaking. And the same thing in math. You need to be able to construct a viable argument, critique the reasoning of others. And so there's a lot of overlap between these practices. So even if if you teach ELA and math, or you just teach one or the other, there's ways that you can kind of reinforce each other across disciplines by noting where these practices are interdisciplinary. One of the things that's important about the census is it determines how many representatives you get in the House, and this is called apportionment. And looking at the map and thinking about what you know about what apportionment means, what sort of math concepts come up here? So use the chat if you don't mind. I'd like to hear what your ideas are. What math tools are used to determine how many representatives Texas gets in the House of Representatives? If you're reading the map, you might be noticing that Texas is the only one that's dark blue, which if you can see the key, that means that you stand to gain 3 seats, actually, depending on how the 2020 census turns out. Jaja says ratio. Yeah, very obvious one. Thank you. The ratio of people to representatives is what, you know, that's going to determine your number. And your number could go up or down depending on the count. You can see some states are losing, some states are gaining, some states are staying the same. But anybody who's undercounted is going to suffer because they'll lose more than they should have lost, or they'll not gain as many as they should have gained, or they'll stay the same when they should have gone up. So this is a great way to teach ratio, and a great way also to think about kind of the difference between ratio and hard numbers, or the difference between percentages and hard numbers, and how populous states are. So you can see California has less land mass than Texas, but has more representatives. Why would that be? You know, you can sort of add up all those Midwestern states and they don't add up to anything like Texas. Why would that be? You know, even though the land mass could be equal to that, why are there so few? You know, you can sort of think about a lot of questions that you could ask there. The other big reason for the census is it determines how much funding each state gets. And this is a slide I shared in the previous webinars. I'm sharing it here now more to think about the math. But it's also important to think about, you know, this is going to affect all of our students. It's going to affect all of us, because how Texas gets counted is going to determine how many resources you get from the federal government to fund these kinds of programs. So these are the top 10 federally funded programs in Texas. There's many more, but actually in my head kind of added up all these percentages, and it actually adds up to 100%, which is interesting because there's many more than 10 programs. Why do the top 10 add up to 100%? And that would be an interesting mathematical thing to think about too. Why would that be? And getting students to think about that, and not necessarily just sort of supplying them with an answer, but, you know, asking them to think critically about it. And even engaging in that act of sort of adding it up in their head, you know, just to just the reason I did it was like, how do these numbers really add up here? And let me just, out of curiosity, what is this going to add up to? And getting, inviting your students to sort of take that step of being curious about something that they see, and then taking a step. You don't have to add it up in their head, but they could use a calculator or they could use a piece of paper. They can do whatever they want. But just inviting them to be curious and then reflect. Why would this be? So it also is helpful just to think about how much these programs matter to all of us, and they matter to our ability to go to school. If these things are shredded, you're living a life that is a lot less secure, and you don't have the bandwidth or the time or the ability to go to school when this kind of social safety net is shredded. So it's a good thing to think about, and it inspires people to take the census more seriously when you get really nitty-gritty with the numbers. So what if you did want to teach some of this stuff? At the New England Literacy Resource Center, we compiled a bunch of materials and vetted them and kind of organized them for you. So if you can look down at sort of the bottom third of this screenshot, you can see that there's a list of math activities, and the list is a bit longer than that. It just falls off the end of the screen, but you could go to nelrc.org/census and click on classroom materials and find a lot of these math activities. I'm not going to take the time to share them right now. I'm just going to let you explore them on your own at some point, but I wanted to just make sure you knew the link and knew that this was available to you. Those are really ready to use and share with your students. The other thing to know about is the census has created a bunch of lessons, both for K through 12 and for adult learners. So I've shared both links. On this slide is the K through 12, and you can see how you can click on it based on grade. You can click on or sort it by K through 5 or 6 through 8 or 9 through 12 and sort them that way. And so you might find stuff there that's suitable for your adult learners. They also have special math worksheets for ELL and adult learners. So there's 4 of them that I found. And so you could click on these and you'll get to a PDF of both the student worksheet and the teacher worksheet. So the teacher sheet obviously has all the prep for you and tells you what is covered and gives you teaching tips and things like that. So there's some real math content that you could just go straight to and use to teach about the census. And I see that some angel has dropped the links into the chat, so that makes it easier for you to grab it. Obviously, you can't grab it off the PowerPoint. So thank you very much for doing that. And you can also find it just by Googling census math worksheets, honestly, or census curriculum or census lesson plans. So you'll find it very easily. So that is just some resources and some tools that you can use. Now I want to just get a little bit more creative with you, and I'm going to show you something live on the web, and I'm going to explore it with you a little bit and guide you around it a little bit. And then I'm going to ask you, and I hope this is doable for most people. I'm assuming you're sitting at a computer and you'll be able to open a tab. But before you do that, let me share my screen and show you around a little bit, and then I'm going to ask you to explore it on your own and come back with some ideas about some ways that you could teach math using this content. So what you see here in this slide is a map that the Census Bureau keeps track of, and it's called a Hard to Count Communities map. And it shows a map of the United States, and there's a key that shows what all those different colors mean. And before we get to it, do you want to just take a guess? You can't see the key, but what do you think the colors mean? So there's dark blue, there's light blue, there's yellow, and there's brown. What do you think it means? What do you think dark blue means? What do you think brown means? What do you think yellow means? What would be your best guess? Keeping in mind the title, Hard to Count Communities, yellow, orange for extremely rural, yes. And what do you think happens? What do you think that means as far as being able to count those communities? Are those your harder to count communities or harder to count? Yeah, brown is harder to count. So you identify those as very rural. Yeah, anything else? Population, yeah. That's a really good point, Gabriella. The darker blue, it could be indicating more populated. And so why would that be easier to count? It's more populated. What are your thoughts about that? Larger demographics of immigrants and ELLs in the orange-yellow areas. Yeah. I'm also thinking probably more Native American reservations, I'm betting, in a lot of those areas. Also seeing like northern Maine has a pretty brown spot, northern Minnesota, northern Montana, left corner of Washington. You can't see Alaska on here, but I'll tell you, Alaska is mostly brown. Cody's saying addresses are more accurate in the more populated communities. That's a really good point. Yeah. Yeah. Also, you know, when you're in these more populated communities, you might hear more radio announcements about the census. You might, you know, get more sort of popular culture infusion about the census. You might get less of that in more rural areas. Patricia says more efficient and more census takers. Yeah, it's a lot easier to just go into an apartment building in Manhattan and knock on every door than it is to drive 10 miles in between ranches somewhere or something like that, right? Or 10 miles probably a short distance. Thank you. These are really good ideas. And I think taking that into your class, that would be like a fun thing to kind of get people. It's a generative activity. You know, people could think critically about what's happening in these areas. Okay, so let me share my screen. And I'm going to take you to this map itself and show you around. So what I have open is two versions right now. First, I have where you can see the whole country pretty easily. Now, I'm going to show you around a little bit here. So right now, what it's clicked on over here in the right corner is 2010. So this is the 2010 results. And if you can see the key, the darker the color, the higher the response rate. So the lighter the blue, the lower the response rate. Now, this is by state. So each state averages itself out, so you don't get a lot of detail. You can switch to seeing it by county. Now you get a lot more detail, and you can see which parts of the states, like even New Mexico was light blue, but if you look at New Mexico by county, you see a lot of counties were super undercounted. Okay, you can also look at it by census tract, which gives you even more detail. Takes a second to fill in. And as we zoom in on Texas, we can decide if we want to look at it by county or by census tract and kind of get different information. You can look at it by 2010, or you can click on 2020. This is so interesting because what you're getting when you click on 2020 is live data. So people are already filling out the census. Many of you may have gotten a postcard from the census with your census ID number, and you went online and you filled out the census, and that means you've been counted. And you know, I filled out my census, and a lot of people, if you can see this map, let's zoom in a little bit. You can see a lot of people have been filling out the census. So the light blue areas, which are going to fill in shortly, those places are 50% responses so far. And the yellow is 40 to 50. And the darker yellow is 30 to 40% response rate, okay? So you can get a lot of interesting information by zooming in on the map and by clicking on 2010 versus 2020, or by choosing county or census tract. So it takes a while to zoom in, so I already zoomed in on Texas just so I could be ready for us here. So you can scroll around and you can zoom in on your county. You could figure out what you wanted to explore more. There's all this information that you can click on here. You can click on libraries, and it will pop up and tell you where the libraries are. You can click on congressional districts, and it will outline the congressional districts for you. You can click on the hardest to count tracts and see where they show up. You can minimize that. That is this feature here called More Map Features. And then you can see this version here. And I like looking at the census tract because it gives you much more detail. So just to zoom in a little more, let's zoom in on Dallas-Fort Worth area. And you can see that it's very different, even just neighborhood by neighborhood. You can see that the McKinney area is light blue. This is 2020. So McKinney is doing pretty well with its self-response rate. And then certain other neighborhoods looks like they haven't even responded, you know, have very little, like 15% or less have responded. So without further ado, I would like to actually set you loose to grab the URL from the chat if Beth or Deb were good enough to put that in there. If that's hard to grab, you can just Google hard to count communities census and you'll get right to it. And try, you know, zooming in, zooming out, try playing around with the buttons, going back and forth between 2010 and 2020. And while you're doing that, I want you to think about what are some ways you could use this in a math class. Let me know. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see if there's any questions in the chat. I'm assuming that all of you are going to be able to get in there. If you're not, if you could just tell me you're having trouble, I could go back to sharing my screen and let you see what I have on my screen, and you could still get ideas, or you could just look at this slide that I have up and see what ideas you come up with. Keeping in mind, we're asking what is a way to bring this to your math students that would help them with their math practices. Yes, I see Tara Poole is saying that when she was in Alaska, the census paid extra. Yeah, and they started counting in Alaska in January because they were aware that certain native villages move in the spring to different hunting grounds, and so they wanted to catch them before they did that. And so there is some cultural awareness on the part of the census. They've also this time around been working much more closely with Indigenous communities, trying to be appropriate in some way, accessible in some way in Indigenous communities. There's difficulties there because, for example, when you get to the part where you have to say what race you are and you can pick that you're Native American, then there's a spot where you're supposed to write in the name of your tribe. And, for some people, they felt like there isn't even room to write the name of their tribe there. And so there's some things that are just culturally not so accessible for everyone, and including even how you think of your household. What you're supposed to count by household. Well, some people's households are somewhat porous. There's not a strict sense of who lives in which house. People kind of go back and forth between different houses. So there's ways that the census is not accessible to every community, and that is something to take into account as we try to avoid massive undercount. All right, I hope people are getting a chance to look around, give you a few more minutes to check it out. And remember, come back with some ideas about how you might use this as a math teacher. Okay, have you had a chance to look at it? I hope you have. I'd like to invite you back to the webinar, and knowing that, of course, you can go back and explore. To me, it's kind of addictive. I love clicking around in it and clicking on the different buttons and sort of comparing 2010 to 2020. And I'm fascinated that 2020 is live data. I just think that's amazing. I think it's very up to date. I mean, it might be 1 or 2 days out, but as people fill out the census online, it literally gets counted on this map. So I see Angela saying, interesting. Yeah, say more about why I think it's interesting, or maybe even better, why is it interesting to you as a math teacher, and what would be interesting to your students about it, and what kinds of math practices do you think would tickle their brains here? Angela's not a math teacher. Okay, I hear you. But okay, then just any kind of critical thinking, because that matters too. So then Patricia Wilson said percentages and ratios. So in what way? How are percentages and ratios relevant here? What would you have to, remember that question? What do I know? What do I not know? What tools do I need to be able to figure this out? What would students have to figure out? What would they have to go find to be able to do a ratio of something to something else? Good, Tara, sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Tara Poole says how this week compares to last week. That is so cool, yes. You could just zoom in on your county, wherever you are, or on your census tract, for even more detail, and you could make a graph, right? You could collect the data every week. Every Monday at 4 o'clock, we're going to check the data and, chart yourselves a graph. Great, thank you. How our county compares to other areas of the country. Yes, I love that idea. Yes, so what would be interesting there? What would you choose? A neighboring county? Would you choose a county, if you're a rural, would you choose an urban one? Would you choose 2 rural ones to compare? I mean, there's all sorts of things to think about there. Jaja says, sorry, I'm not a math teacher too, but I think this is important to learn this for me to know the diversity of languages at home. Yes, your students probably speak a lot of different languages at home, trying to fill out the census and when it's not their language. Cities versus rural areas. Yeah, it was so interesting. And what is the size of a census tract? I was seeing this in urban areas. The census tracts are geographically a lot smaller, but probably demographically a lot bigger, or population-wise a lot bigger. Angela says this is definitely opening my mind as well. Great. I mean, and again, be specific if you can. How is it opening your mind? Because this is how we're going to be able to think about this for our students' sake too. It helps students orient themselves to looking at maps. Period. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Just looking at a map. I mean, listen, let's be clear. we don't even look at maps anymore. We just GPS everything. So this is a great map reading opportunity. And that's great for the HSE test. Thank you so much. Yeah. So again, you know, when you're looking at a map, you have to read in a whole different way. Your eyes are not reading text. They're not reading left to right. You know, you have to use all sorts of different parts of your brain to try to make sense of the map. You have to look at the key, right? You have to be able to read a key. That means that it's a whole different kind of document reading. And then you have to interpret the key. And then you have all this digital literacy because you click on different things and different things happen. Oh no, how did I get here? I meant to be there. Oh, how do I minimize that and maximize that? And you know, you're just giving them this chance to just to explore all these things, and interest is what's pulling them along. But meanwhile, they're getting all these digital skills and they're all these critical thinking skills, and they're seeing themselves, like they're seeing their county, their census tract, you know, names of places that they recognize where they live and where their children's school is, or where, you know, maybe they work in a different county. So, you know, it's just alive and it's real. So it's really, you're going to be pulling them along through interest, not through with the carrot. You know, the carrot is interest here. And, you know, it's not a punitive driven thing. You know, you have to learn this, so buckle up and just do it. You know, it's kind of like engaging and fun, and, you know, you get jazzed about it. So making conclusions and inferences, yes, you could make a guess. You could say, well, my hypothesis is this, like I'm guessing that those brown areas are very rural. Well, then how would you find out? How would you find out? Well, you know, you could, what's the name of the county? You could Google population of this county, and people could, you know, try to find out the population of that county. And then they would have to think about their data. Where are they getting it from? Is it a reasonable source? Should they trust that source? When was the last time the population in that county was actually counted? What if there was an undercount in that county? You know, all sorts of questions come up. Melissa says percentages for each state from 2010 to 2020. Yes. That's a very interesting question. And even turning it into social studies and math project. Yeah, how did it impact us? Yeah, thank you. Melissa says, I like the map idea. Great. So what I really wanted to do here with this was just kind of get you excited about the existence of this map and the existence of live data. So 2010 obviously isn't live data. That's firm data. That's counted. It's done. It's not changing. But 2020 is always changing. So I also had this idea that, you know, what if you in your program could change the count, and you did a big push in 1 week and you reached out to everybody in your program, and I don't know, say that was 100 people, and each one of them talked to 10 other households. Could you change the numbers of your county, and could you see it happen live? You know, you did the big census week push, and you could check on this Monday and then check again the next Monday, and did you see a change? You know, do you have enough power to actually see something change? That would be so cool. Gabriella says, census maps explain visualization of numbers that can be projected in math problems and make it easy to analyze for students. Yes, good point. Yeah, you're just giving them a different way to play with data and numbers. And so many students think, I'm not a math person, I can't do math. You know, but let's not start with that. Let's start with, oh, we have this interesting map. What is it telling us? You know, and then let them get there on their own, you know, and I just think it's a different way into math. You know, not that sometimes we don't have to, you know, memorize our multiplication tables and do hard stuff in math. I'm all about that. But sometimes we can just kind of float into it because it's interesting. So that's what I hoped this map would give you all. I, you know, made my own little collection of ideas, and many of these you guys already came up with. So, but here's some thoughts, like explain the key in your own words. So for me, that meant, you know, just really study the key. It's all about the key. You know, you read the title of the map and the key, and you can figure out a lot. Comparing census tract with county, how is that information different? You know, the color changes when you click on county, and when you click on census, the whole color changes. So what's going on there? What are the different advantages and disadvantages of looking at the data by state, county, and census tract? Because you learn something different by looking at it differently. So what do you lose and what do you gain? Compare your census tract with a census tract of a different color. Somebody else already suggested something similar to that. Look up the population information for one rural and one urban county. Compare the completion rates by percentage and by hard numbers, and what do you learn from that? You know, I think it's really good when students dive into percentage stuff. You know, if you have a very rural census tract and 100 people fill out the census, that's going to look like a huge percentage jump. But if 100 people in downtown Houston fill out the census. It's not going to show up. It's not going to barely show. So that's a kind of interesting thing. What would it take to increase the percentage response rate in your county? So that was kind of my last point there was, what if you really took this on and tried to make it move? Wouldn't that be fun? And then for all of this, just any problem you might pose to students, remember the goal isn't just to solve the problem, but for students to think critically and ask those questions of themselves. What do I know? What do I not know? What can I figure out? And what can I do to figure it out? Good things to keep in mind, and I hope that will prove useful to you in your math class and engaging for your students. So I've been saying that, maybe there's a way to help people spread the word about this, and there is. It's this census ambassadorship, and I want to make sure I have enough time to tell you about that. So I'm just going to go over these distance learning strategies very quickly, because I know also you've been getting great webinars and great scaffolding from Train, and I know that that's been helpful. But what I want to just flag here is that our distance learning strategies can be anywhere in this spectrum. They can be very high tech, medium tech, low tech. And, I know a lot of our students don't have access to high-speed internet. They might not have smartphones. They might not have laptops. So we just want to keep in mind that while we might be able to share some stuff in a high-tech way, there's also plenty of low-tech ways we can do it. We can mail packets of materials to our students. I was talking to a teacher in Massachusetts who literally has gone around and dropped things off at students' homes, safely. She wears gloves. She doesn't interact with the person. She just drops it for them. And then they will do the homework. And if they have a phone where they can take a picture of their homework and send back, that's how they do their homework and send it into the teacher. So also obviously teaching by telephone, contacting students by telephone. So there's high tech and low tech. And there's also this interesting thing that I found at the World Ed Tech Center, this article by Daniel Stafford, where he makes this grid showing high bandwidth, high immediacy down to low immediacy, low bandwidth. And he makes the case that the green zone, the low bandwidth and low immediacy, is the underappreciated workhorse of distance learning. And it's basically like email and discussion boards. And he says that in a way, what we should do when we're doing online courses is challenge ourselves to basically use the green zone and have that be our foundation. And then occasionally, go off into the yellow, red, or blue zones as necessary or as needed. But if we start with the green zone, we're actually kind of ensuring a little bit more equity possibly for our students, because it's going to be more accessible to a larger number of people. It's consistent, it's practical, it's accessible. And that's his advice, is to try designing your class with the green zone as your starting place. And you can find this article on the World Ed Tech Center website, along with a lot of amazing, they've been doing a webinar a week with distance learning strategies. So if it can supplement what you're getting from Train, that would be great. And you can find lots of articles and other resources at the Ed Tech Center. Let me, in our last 10 minutes, get to this whole idea of the Census Ambassadorship, because I sort of promoted this at the beginning by saying, there's $50 gift cards and $20 gift cards. So now let me give you a little bit more detail about it. So I did a whole hour-long webinar about how to train census ambassadors. And so this is going to be the 10-minute version, so forgive me. But you can always reach me by email if you have any questions, or you can always watch a recording of that other webinar. And I'm really happy to talk to anybody, so please reach out to me. So a census ambassador understands census basics. They have practiced communicating about the census. So if you were doing this in your classroom, or if you're a program director and you want your teachers to be able to do this, that's a really key part of this, is they have to have some opportunity to practice. They might be able to support somebody to fill out the census, and I think that's really critical, that they could be on the phone with somebody, a neighbor, a friend, a family member, and the friend could be trying to fill it out online, and the census ambassador could support them through that process. You're not allowed, in fact, it's illegal to fill out the census for somebody else. Census Bureau workers can do that, but a census ambassador, like in this sense, they cannot do that. A census ambassador doesn't have to be an expert. They don't have to know everything, but, and they should be able to feel comfortable just saying, oh, I don't really know the answer to that. Oh, good question. You can find out and get back to you. The little task that a census ambassador does do in order to get paid is they have to invite people to take the pledge to be counted, and I'll share the link for that. It's a really simple pledge. You just put your name and you say who your census ambassador was who invited you to take this pledge. And for every one of those that you get, a census ambassador will get $1 plus 20, the original 20. So they get 20 just for signing up to be a census ambassador, and they get $1 for every person who they get to take the pledge to be counted. So doesn't that sound kind of fun? Like, isn't that a fun thing to take out to your students? This is an actual concrete, real thing where students can get a little gift card. It's not a huge amount of money, but it's a little something. And they're doing something that really matters to their community. This isn't make work. This isn't jumping through hoops. This is real, man. This is where we get our funding for our programs. This is where we get our representation in Congress. This is where local government gets, a lot of decisions are made at a local government level. This is huge. This is where they decide how many schools to build. This is where they decide to put clinics and hospitals. This really makes a difference. So you're giving people not just make work, but something really concrete that matters right now. This is what the pledge looks like. Like I said, it's very simple. You just put your name, the name of the census ambassador you talk to, and you don't even have to put the email, and you don't even have to put the name of the census ambassador. But if you don't, then you can't get, the census ambassador can't get the $1. So there's 3 levels of participation for taking the pledge. So I mentioned at the beginning that if you're a teacher and you're eligible to receive a gift card, I know some teachers are maybe forbidden from taking money for other things that are related to their teaching. So if that's you, sorry, but if it's not you, you could get this $50 gift card by just going to this URL and taking the pledge to be counted as a teacher, and taking the pledge to train census ambassadors. You also need to join our community of practice. There's a tiny URL for that too. So you have to join our community of practice because that's where you can get access to a lot of resources, documents that you can download and adapt and use as you please, recordings of webinars, and access to each other, because there's other people in there training people to be census ambassadors. They're doing it in this new moment, the pandemic moment. They're figuring out how to do it in a distance, using virtual platform. And so it's a place where you can get support. You can bring your questions and you can get advice from your peers there. And also I'm in that community of practice all the time, so you'll hear from me too. Okay, so that's one level. That's you, the teacher. Or not a teacher, maybe your staff or anybody else. If you're training people to be census ambassadors, that's your pledge. Then as you train your census ambassadors, they take this pledge here, the next one, tiny URL PTBC, that stands for Pledge to be Counted. And then, and keep in mind, if you're 1 or 2, at level 1 or 2, you have to put your address, because obviously the gift card has to get sent to you in the mail. So don't forget that part. We're not going to come chasing you for your address, so you have to put your address so that the gift card can be sent to you. And then the individual one is the one that you saw the screenshot of. You don't have to put an address there. There's nothing that's going to be mailed to you. But if you're a census ambassador, that's what you're asking people to do, is to go to that tiny URL and take the pledge to be counted. I see Cody Allen says, I am completely comfortable saying, I don't know. That's great, Cody. I don't know if you're a teacher or not, but as a teacher myself, and just as a human, I think it is so important to say, I don't know, and to say it confidently. Like, this is not a reflection on me. This doesn't mean I'm any less. It just means that's something I don't know. And either I can find out, or I can find out somebody else who can find out. And being comfortable with I don't know is a really important job skill. It's an important academic skill. Like, if you're in your class and your teacher's talking about something you don't understand and you can't say I don't know, you're not going to learn that lesson that day. And if you're at work and somebody tells you to do something, you have no idea what they just said, and you don't say, I don't know, we know how that's going to turn out. So, and math is so important for making mistakes. Oh my gosh, it's so important to make mistakes in math. Every time a student makes a mistake in math, we should all just jump up and down and appreciate them for giving us all this chance to see how that mistake was made and see what we can do about it and just get joy out of our mistakes. Thank you. Okay, so this is our Census Ambassador program. What do you think about that? Is anybody interested in doing that? Let me hear from you in the chat. Let me hear if you have any questions. I have a change agent lesson packet that you can use to teach the census in a very simple, straightforward way. And I even have them at 3 different levels. There's a beginner level, intermediate, and advanced. These are free. These are on the change agent website. They're just a few pages long. They actually just include 3 articles. you know, and they basically give you all the census basics that you need to be a census ambassador. So you teach these 3 articles, go through some of the activities, and then have your census ambassador practice with you a little bit, and practice with each other, practice with their family, practice with their kids, and bingo, you have a census ambassador. Then, so that lesson packet is important, and it's also important to do lesson packet 21, which is about how to fill out the questionnaire, because I believe our census ambassadors should have some practice having looked at the questionnaire, so that if people ask questions about it, they're not, you know, a deer in the headlights. They kind of go, oh yeah, that's what they ask on the census, or no, there is no citizenship question on the census, or no, they don't ask anything about what country you're from. They ask about your ethnicity, but they do not ask you, you know, if you're foreign born, what country, or anything like that. So lesson packets 20 and 21 are your go-to packets. We also have a replica of the online form at this Tiny Earl. It's an amazing resource. If you're teaching using Zoom or using shared screen or Google Hangouts or anything like that, you could open this up, you could walk your students through this, and it's a practice, it's an exact, almost exact replica of what they're going to do when they fill out the online questionnaire, okay? So I think this is another great tool for helping your census ambassadors get going. Okay, sometimes the student feels afraid to complete the census. Yes, so that's going to be something a census ambassador is going to have to deal with. One thing about those materials that you're teaching with is a lot of them are written by immigrants themselves, and they're saying, listen, your data is safe, this is why it's safe, this is the law that protects your data. Is it guaranteed 100%? No, because nothing in life is, but these are the things to take into account. You know, this is the potential loss to our community versus the potential risk. You have to decide yourself. We're not strong-arming anybody to do anything here. That's never what we do as teachers. We provide information. We even share our passion. You know, this is not, you know, we can be passionate about this. This really matters, and we can really believe that, and we can communicate that. And our census ambassadors could communicate that. But it's never like anyone's going to be judged for not doing it, okay? And we got to really mean that when we say that.
Cynthia, this is Beth.
Yeah.
Did you see the question Patricia put in the chat? Before we end, would you briefly go over the major pandemic changes to Census 2020, dates, extensions?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So we only have another minute or two. So I'll put this slide up while I talk about that. I have been immersed in everything to do with the census, and I have to say that, you know, even though we always talk about how there's 4 ways to fill out the census, online, by phone, on paper, and in person, what really is going to be key is for people to fill it out online. Because with the pandemic, the Census Bureau has fewer employees, they don't have operators managing the phones. I called the numbers myself. I called the English number and the Spanish number, the 2 languages I can understand. And basically, it's, you know, when you get a reported, you just get a robot, and the robot says, if you're calling for the paper copy, call back later. I think it gives a date. If you're calling to speak to somebody, you know, basically you're out of luck because we don't have operators right now because of the coronavirus. Please go fill out the census online. And basically all roads lead to the online questionnaire. And when that's the really important thing to remember, is that the online version is the way to do it. So if people can do it, people can do it on their phones. People can do the online questionnaire in, I believe it's 13 languages, so English plus 12 other languages. So it's very likely that they might even be able to do it in their own language. There's 59 languages where students can get a tour of the online questionnaire in their language, but only 12 of those is the actual questionnaire available in their language besides English. So for a lot of those, like say, for example, Navajo, you can go to a language support census page that's all in Navajo, but when you click on the actual questionnaire, it's in English. So there's a video on that page that explains in Navajo how to fill out the questionnaire, but then when you go to fill it out, the questionnaire is in English. You know, it's great that it's in 12 languages, but it's not in 59 languages. So it's likely that your students will be covered, but there's a possibility that they won't. It's also just very hard to follow the phone prompts I have to say. I don't think our students are going to have an easy time calling those numbers. It's there, it's available, it's a resource that they should know about and they should use, but it could almost be a little research project. You could have your students go call those numbers and see what happens and report back to the class. And it's also in flux. So like I called those numbers, the most recently time I did it was about a week ago. So, you know, maybe it's changed. So people could kind of call those and see what's going on. So it could be a little bit of a research project. But honestly, my big takeaway for all of you all right now, and I know we're out of time, is really try to get your students to fill it out online and support them in whatever way you can to do that. If they do not have their 12-digit, I think it's 12-digit ID code that they're supposed to receive in the mail from the census, they can still go online and fill it out. They just have to put their address. So don't let that lack of that code get in the way. You can absolutely fill it out online without that code. You just have to put your address. Are there any questions before I go? And keep in mind, I will definitely be available to you by email. And Angela's saying it really is easy to fill out online. It really is. It's actually quite easy. It's very short. Thanks for staying a couple minutes late. If you have questions and you want to stay a little bit longer and put them in the chat, I'd be very happy to stay and answer them. I hope you got something out of this. I hope you got some concrete tools and also some inspiration for teaching the census or teaching math in the context of the census. And I hope to see you in the community of practice, and I hope to see some new census ambassadors out of this. So thank you all so much for your great attention, and good luck to everybody, and stay well.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, for joining us this afternoon and for another great webinar. So we're going to hold the line open here for just a few minutes to see if there's any questions as we roll off. And I want to thank everybody that joined us today for this webinar. We appreciate you all, and we thank you for all the hard work you're doing for all of our students across Texas. Take care, everyone. Until next time.